Hi, this is Tony Richards. Welcome back to Better Than Before. We are up to the segment where we're going to do today's leadership and business lesson. And we tend to live our lives in one of two ways, either by design or by default. Most of us understand when a setting is set to the default position, that means that that setting has been determined the way most average people would use that piece of equipment or that tool or whatever. So the default setting is just the average usage setting. And I never believe that anybody wants to be average. I don't know anybody who wants to have an average night's sleep, get up the next morning, have an average breakfast, kiss their average spouse goodbye, go off to their average job in their average automobile, have an average lunch, have an average afternoon, and then go out for an average dinner and maybe see an average movie. I mean, nobody really wants to have a life that's average. But if you're living by default, you're set to the average position. And there's not enough understanding of the various parameters in order to determine a more customized or high-performing set point. This is what happens when we don't understand the potential that we have. Every human being has unlimited potential. You'll live most of your life trying to convert your potential into real results, and your mission should be to exhaust as much of your potential as possible, knowing that you'll never use up all your potential. When we're not sure or we can't imagine what we're actually capable of achieving, we continue to live our lives on that default setting. And we keep doing what we've been doing to try our best to maintain our current performance. Truth is, though, life is not freeze-dried. When we choose to continue our setting on default, we're actually losing momentum. When we're just doing average and trying to maintain the status quo, we're losing our trajectory, and that's declining. Very much like a plane landing. The aircraft may be actually decreasing at a fairly substantial rate by what we can look out the window and see. Until we're really close to the landing strip, it's hard to possess and process the true amount of the plane's descent. It's like a good friend of mine once said, falling feels like flying for a little while, right? Then all of a sudden that plane is on the ground. Same's true in our default mode. It's difficult to process the amount of momentum we're actually losing because we're trying our best just to hold on where we feel comfortable. Living your life by design is just the same in the opposite direction. Living your life by design is all about making course corrections. It's about identifying obstacles and constraints and navigating those in order to reach a predetermined destination. It's about breaking things that seemingly are not broken. Here's some examples. When you're living by default, you tell yourself, there's nothing I can do. But when you're living by design, you say to yourself, let's look at options. When you're living by default, you tell yourself, that's just the way I am. But when you're living by design, you say, I can always work on myself. When you're living by default, you say, he makes me so mad. But when you're living by design, you say, I'm responsible for the way I feel. When you're living by default, you say, they won't let me do that. When you're living by design, you say, I can influence other people. When you're living by default, you say, I have to do that. When you're living by design, you say, I'm responsible for my own actions. When you're living by default, you continually say, I can't. But when you're living by design, you say, I choose to. When you're living by default, you say, if only. But if you're living by design, you say, I will. What would we have to have happen for us to commit to a customized setting for our lives we design ourselves rather than continuing in the default position? I would challenge you today, if you're listening to our show, to live your life more by design than in the default position. You're responsible for you. You're responsible for how you think. You're responsible for what you say. You're responsible for how you feel. You have to take responsibility for yourself and get your life more in the design mode and less on the default mode.
Thank you for listening to Better Than Before with Tony Richards, a business leaders podcast powered by Clear Vision Development Group. For more resources from Tony, visit clearvisiondevelopment.com. Join us next time for for another episode of Better Than Before with Tony Richards.